accumulation of capital. Yeah, I've indicated that there's a lot of material there. I don't have time to look at it all. I will just try to give you another example of it to kind of clue that idea. So what I want to do today is I want to look at the effects of slavery in the Constitution. The fact that the slave economy wasn't just financially, economically very powerful, I talked about last week, but actually affected the Constitution, the way the Constitution is constructed, and continues to affect d'impôts dans le lieu que les femmes de ménage payent sur leur salaire. So, but that is in the Constitution, right? And it was there to prevent the federal government from controlling or limiting the slave economy. Okay, so what I'd like to do today would be I want to tell you about a particular origin, kind of like the origin of capitalist destruction of the environment. The first major example of that, because we live in a world where the environment is being destroyed. It's being destroyed by capitalists, and people like to say it's the bad face of capitalism. It's not. It is the face of capitalism. That's what capitalism does. Point barre. And I want to talk about an original space where that happened. I want to look then at the places in the Constitution where slavery determines the content of the Constitution, and then I want to look at the first version of the Constitution, première mouture de la Constitution de 1781. Which is called the Articles of Confederation, to look at some of the constitutional problems caused by the desire for independent economic power of the slave economies, right? So the slave economies' desire to protect their property had constitutional consequences. Can I ask you, what do you think is the oldest constitution in Europe? Which country has the oldest constitution, in Europe? Can you guess? L'Allemagne? England? I can't hear you. Switzerland, yes, absolutely, Switzerland. Switzerland has the oldest constitution in Europe, the 15th century, okay? And it's a federal constitution, Confédération Helvétique, it's federal, like Canada, like the United States, and it has longevity, these federal constitutions, But because in America, one of the things which is kind of like a fil conducteur of all of this history is the tension, the conflict and tension between the state government and the federal government. Okay. Obviously, when I say state, I mean les États. I don't mean like l'État au sens français. I mean, moi, je travaille pour l'État. Okay. But not in that sense. All right. Can I just say one thing? Now, a student just told me something I never thought of. I often use the term colony, right? This is the colonial period. C'est jusqu'en 67, the colonial period. Because how many colonies are there in North America? 13. Okay, like the stars on the Confederate flag. There are 13 colonies. Because of course they're British colonies. So they're called colonies, right? And after independence, they're not called colonies anymore, they're called states, right? I thought that was clear, but my student just said no. So, voilà, juste pour que ça soit clair, okay. So I just wanted to, as a kind of the original model for capitalist destruction of the environment in modern Europe and therefore in North America, take the Portuguese, the Portugais. En 1420, the Portuguese colonized an island in the Atlantic called Madeira. In Madeira, I think it's in French, no? A lot of water and a lot of wood. Il faut 60 kilos de bois pour raffiner 1 kilo de sucre. Donc chaque kilo de sucre raffiné consomme 60 kilos de bois. So the sugar production in Madeira reached a peak in 1506, 1506 was the height of Portuguese sugar production in Madeira. Madeira produced all the sugar consumed in Europe, apart from like beet sugar, I don't know what you call it in French, like like betterave, mais c'est jaune. What do you call it in French? On fait du sucre avec ça. Vous n'êtes pas du nord de la France, hein, parce qu'au nord on fait beaucoup de ça. In English, you call it sugar beet. C'est des bêtes, B-E-T-T-E, je crois, bêtes à sucre ou bêtes de sucre. Non, non, pas les cannes. Les cannes, c'est Madeira, c'est les Antilles, tout ça. Hein? Betterave, mais pas la rouge, la jaune. Oui, voilà. So there was some sugar from that, but the massive majority of sugar was from Madeira. Madeira, this tiny little island, became the world's producer of sugar. Okay? But of course, what happened because they used so much wood that they cut down all the trees in the island. So they had to get some more. Then they had to get trees from the mountains, the wood from the mountains. So they imported more slaves to go up and cut the trees on the mountains. To make the same amount of sugar, you needed 3 times the number of slaves. Okay, so the sugar became less rentable, right? And the wood was finished, so they stopped the sugar production in Madeira collapsed. En 20 ans, c'était 20% de la production de 1506. Yeah, so sugar on Madeira became much smaller, right? So what did they do? So the Portuguese on Madeira, they had money from capitalists in 2 places particularly, La ville de Gênes en Italy, Genoa, because Genoa was one of the early banking centers, You know, the word bank is an Italian notion. Banco, meaning un banc, parce que les banquiers étaient sur les bancs à Florence, littéralement. And so they got money from capitalists in Genoa and capitalists in the Flandres, in Holland. They were financing the sugar in Madeira. So what they did, they left Madeira and they went to another place called Sao Tome, another island called Sao Tome. They did the same thing there, sugar destruction. Then they moved, the Portuguese looking for somewhere else to cultivate sugar. They went to Brazil and they destroyed the forest in Brazil, plant sugar. Sugar is extremely destructive. And Jamaica as well. Jamaica became a sugar place. destroyed the environment. Of course, they don't just destroy the environment, they destroy the communities that live there, right? You destroy the communities. But what you do, you accumulate capital, right? You accumulate capital. And of course, you accumulate gold particularly, and money is gold, money is not paper money at the time, right? And you see that in the Constitution. If you look, donc, si on regarde dans la Constitution, la page 14, so you're in Article 1, so the powers of Congress, okay, Article 1. Section, donc, we're on page 14, à gauche, vers le bas, là, okay, yeah? Okay? We're in Section 10, Clause 1. Vous y êtes là? Ça commence, no state shall enter into any treaty. Vous y êtes là? Yeah?
Yes.
So the first kind of two lines do not concern us, because I don't want to talk about that. Line 3. So le préambule, ça commence, no state shall, donc aucun État n'a le droit de, et puis je lis donc la troisième ligne, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. So only gold or silver, l'argent métal, yeah, can be used to pay debts. Donc surtout pas paper money, right? So qu'est-ce que c'est ça? Pourquoi ça? So this is because landowners, yeah, propriétaires terriens, who were also, of course, often slave owners, yeah. What they did, one of the things they did was they had poor people renting the land from them. I'll teach you a word you may know. Does anybody know how you say a locataire in English? Vous louez un appartement, vous êtes locataire. Comment on dit locataire, vous savez? Non? Tenant. T-E-N-A-N-T, c'est le mot français. Tenant. A tenant is a locataire. Okay, it's the normal word for a locataire, tenant. And you know how you say, juste pour faire le pendant, le propriétaire d'un appartement, c'est qui? À qui est-ce que le locataire, the tenant, who does it pay the rent to? Pays the rent to the landlord. Fantastic word. No? Le maître des terres. The landlord. Yeah? Ça en dit long sur l'histoire de ces trucs. So in the colonies, there were a lot of tenant farmers, you know, hundreds of thousands of poor white people working the land, tenant farmers. They had to pay a rent for the land. Okay? They had to pay the owner for the privilege of working the land. And they had to give the owner a percentage of their productivity, right? Yeah? Comme au Moyen-Âge, on donnait à l'église, non? The dîme, yes, so the dîme you call it in French, I think, no? Yeah. And of course, they had debts, right? Yeah. So these people, they were not allowed to pay their debts. They had to have gold or silver. Yeah. So you had this incredible exponential acceleration of poverty in the colonies of the 18e siècle. Okay. And that is one of what happens, j'anticipe un petit peu, but a lot of those poor whites, like a lot of black slaves, and also indigenous people, Indians, yeah, they revolted against this control, this injustice. And c'est un fait qu'avant, donc la déclaration d'indépendance c'est 1776, oui, le 4 juillet 1776, avant 70, il n'y a aucune revendication d'indépendance. It's extraordinary. Nobody was wanting independence from Britain. No? And you think, why suddenly independence becomes this kind of big thing? Yeah, like kind of Brexit. Yeah? Why this big thing? And it's because the rich were becoming more and more anxious about insurrection, des revendications, violent insurrection, on the part of the poor, whites, allied with slaves, qui était le cauchemar évidemment des propriétaires, c'est que les pauvres blancs et les esclaves soient alliés. Encore plus s'ils étaient alliés avec ce qui restait des indigènes. Oui, c'est une des raisons du développement du racisme, c'est pour les séparer. Le racisme était un instrument politique. Il n'y avait pas de racisme avant 1600. Ça n'existait pas, le racisme, tel qu'il était instrumentalisé. Oui. So what they did, the proprietor class, in order to avoid insurrection, they created an independence movement. They called it the Sons of Liberty. And suddenly these guys were saying, no, your big enemy, your enemy is not us, your enemy is Britain. And they organized that movement with fantastic energy and success. Okay? And, the American Revolution was not kind of a Jacobin revolution, right? Yeah? It was a revolution where certain economic interests consolidated their economic power, right? Because, of course, a lot of these guys were, they were getting capital from Britain, also English funds. English funds was the enormous amount of money being taken into England, from, for example, India, les Indes. On a calculé les sommes volées par les Anglais, les Indiens, oui, par la taxation directe. Oui. Quand les Anglais sont arrivés en Inde, ils ont quadruplé les impôts tout de suite, immédiatement, pour prendre de l'argent. Okay. À 40Can you say again? Oui, no, but of course there was incredible inequality in India. So, India, for example, had an extraordinary textile industry, which was broken by the British. Manchester textiles destroyed Indian textile industry. Absolutely. That idea of the kind of paranoia of the proprietor classes is very powerful in the political history. Okay, if you look before going into the slide thing, if you look on page 3 of your plaquettes, there's a map there qui n'est pas très facilement lisible. Là, ici, là, à gauche. Là. So one of the things is that the colonies were all very different. Okay, they were not homogène. Okay, I mean, you know, financial inequality and all those things I'm talking about were common through all the colonies. But their ideology, their culture, their political structure, their ownership structure were very different. They're very different. Yeah. If you look here, yeah, can you hit in this part here? Yeah, en diagonale. Oui. Donc là, le territoire en haut de cette partie-là, c'est les Carolinas. Okay, that's the Carolinas, là. Okay. In the Carolinas, for example, you had the land, 90% of the land was owned by 2% of the population. Yeah. Of the whites in the Carolinas, you had something like 2,000 owners of land and something like 60,000 or 60,000 blancs qui ne possédaient rien du tout. Yeah. And you had about 40,000 esclaves. So you had a tiny, tiny percentage of owners. But look at just là, on est dans les là, quand je donne ces chiffres-là, c'est dans les années 1740, 1750. Okay? Juste, je lis là, ce qui est écrit en diagonale là. Okay? Alors d'abord, il faut voir la date. C'est 1663-65. Okay? Next week, I'm going to be talking to you about English political history in the 17th century. Yeah? Because to understand the American political institutions, to understand the Constitution, you have to understand what happened in the 17th century in England. Oui, grosso modo, il y a eu 2 révolutions en Angleterre au XVIIe. Et il y avait une lutte, il y a beaucoup de luttes. Il y avait une lutte entre le Parlement et le roi. Et les Anglais, ils ont rédigé les droits du Parlement dans les années 1687-8. Okay. Les droits du Parlement par rapport au roi. Et ces droits du Parlement, le document s'appelle The Bill of Rights. Bill, ça veut dire un document. Bill, il y a beaucoup de sens au mot bill. Bill, ça veut dire une facture. A bill can be a billet de banque. A bill can be une affiche. A bill can be a projet de loi. Okay? So a bill is a kind of a document, right? That's what the word bill means. Yeah. Plus tard, quand on va voir le processus de législation aux États-Unis, dans le Congrès, on va rencontrer le mot bill, qui veut dire un projet de loi. Okay, dans ce contexte particulier. So, on revient. Dans les années 1680, le Parlement britannique rédige a Bill of Rights, que les droits du Parlement vis-à-vis du roi. Le même terme, Bill of Rights, est utilisé par Jefferson et Madison pour décrire les 10 premiers amendements de la Constitution américaine, qui énumèrent les droits de l'individu vis-à-vis du gouvernement, les droits de l'homme. So the Bill of Rights, in the American sense, is our individual rights. Okay, like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, yeah, freedom of the press. So en français, la laïcité française n'est pas freedom of religion, it's freedom from religion, right? Yeah, la laïcité is not freedom of religion, it's freedom from religion. Yeah? Which is always strange. I mean, there's kind of the relation to religion. I mean, like, if you imagine all these 330,000 enfants abusés par les prêtres catholiques, yeah? Ça fait 15 par jour sur 70 ans. 15 nouveaux, frais, sans parler des abonnés. Yeah? Every day, 15 new children for 70 years. Just imagine, I just thought, imagine that had happened in a Muslim country. Vous imaginez ça dans un pays musulman. What would the droite in France have said? Yeah, c'est la religion, c'est comme ça. Yeah? Right? That's what they would have said. right? So when you know, where is the discourse about le catholicisme? C'est comme ça, hein? C'est la religion comme ça. This the kind of the the relation between politics and religion is of course extremely violent, extremely invisible and extremely deceptive. Yeah. So coming back to this here, okay. Granted to the board of 8 noble proprietors. Granted means octroyé, donné en cadeau. So all of that territory there was given to a board and conseil of 8 noble proprietors, 8 aristocrates. Oui, en 1663-65. It's important because that was when the date is significant. Because, et encore une fois, je vais revenir la semaine prochaine, entre 1649 et 1660, l'Angleterre c'était une république. Yeah? There was no king. Right? It was a revolution. Right? And in 1660 or 60, le roi revient. Okay? Il était à Versailles. Il s'était réfugié à Versailles, il revient. Okay? And qu'est-ce qu'il fait? Il donne des terres à ses copains. Okay? So 8 guys own that, Carolinas, and here you got Louisiana, you got Alabama down there, yeah, Mississippi. And then in the middle, si vous avez à lire entre là, yeah, you have Georgia, granted to, donc donné à, Oglethorpe, 1732. Okay, a man called Oglethorpe, yeah, a friend of English capitalists, becomes the owner of Georgia. All for him. Yeah? One guy. And you have other states too, like Pennsylvania. If you go up here, yeah, Pennsylvania, yeah, là. Granted to Penn, 1681, donné à, donc il s'appelait William Penn. Pennsylvania, Sylvania, ça veut dire le pays des forêts. C'est du latin. Énormément d'eau, énormément de main-d'œuvre, there's sugar, okay, there's cotton, there is tobacco. Tobacco is extremely thirsty plant, okay. And the fourth one is indigo, yeah, indigo, blue dye, right, because in teinture bleu, indigo, yeah. You know, like the So eventually, the American indigo market, yeah, the oui, c'est comme les comptoirs. Oui. So the first kind of colony is a kind of commercial venture. Okay. Then the second type of colony is like number 18. Number 18, proprietary colony. So in other words, a colony with one proprietor that we've just seen, Oglethorpe, Penn. Yeah, those are proprietary colonies. Okay. So the third type of colony is, I'd like to add a word. Yeah, if you look at number 15, so number 10 is Plymouth. Plymouth is in which state? Do you know? Plymouth. No? It's very famous, Plymouth. No? Massachusetts. Plymouth is where the Puritans came. Okay? Number 10. Plymouth, Massachusetts. Numéro 11. The Puritans aussi, on les appelle the Separatists, aussi on les appelle the Pilgrims. Ça, c'est des synonymes. Puritans, Separatists, Pilgrims. Okay? C'était des Calvinistes. American Puritans are Calvinistes. Yeah? Compact, qui est écrit là, okay, numéro 13. The Mayflower Compact was the first kind of legal constitutional document, a kind of a statement of principles. C'est magnifique, le Mayflower Compact. Est-ce que vous avez étudié dans l'histoire britannique ou anglaise, vous connaissez, est-ce que la phrase Magna Carta, ça veut dire quelque chose? Non? Ah, dommage. Magna Carta, ça veut dire la grande charte. C'est un document de 1215 où les barons en Angleterre revendiquaient des droits vis-à-vis du roi. Oui? Et the Magna Carta, je pense qu'il y a 4 exemplaires en Angleterre. Si vous allez à Salisbury, près de Stonehenge, dans la cathédrale, il y a un exemplaire de ce truc. C'est très émouvant. The Magna Carta is the first statement of human rights in the world, à part donc, les documents iraniens, oui, et babyloniens, Hammurabi, oui, la codification des lois dans l'Empire persan au 5e siècle avant Jésus. Mais en Europe, the first is the Magna Carta, okay, 1215. It's a fantastic document. It's really, c'est les droits de l'homme. It's a fabulous document. C'est sacré pour les Anglais, the Magna Carta. C'est leur truc, ça, Magna Carta. The Mayflower Compact is very similar, okay? It's the question of rights and the question of the law. Okay, donc soit dit en passant, the Mayflower Compact. So, 1621 is the Puritans, donc Plymouth, numéro 10, et 1630, d'autres puritains, enfin, c'est pas les mêmes puritains, mais d'autres, notre secte protestant arrivent à Massachusetts Bay Colony, numéro 15. Okay? Massachusetts Bay Colony. Very religious, very pious, but, and c'est Massachusetts Bay dont le gouverneur a dit, j'ai cité la semaine dernière, où il disait qu'il justifiait l'extermination des Indiens. Oui, que c'est dans la Bible. La Bible nous donne, même pas le droit, mais l'ordonnance, l'injonction d'exterminer les indigènes et prendre leur terre. Okay? Et c'est Dieu qui le veut. Parce que de toute manière, cette terre n'appartient à personne. Okay? Terra nullius. 1630, 1630. That's Massachusetts Bay Colony. So, the word I want to get to, by this long detour, is number 16, Congregationalists. Okay? So, the Congregationalists is a particular sect in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay? I'm interested in the word in there is a word congregation. So that's a word I want you to know. Okay, the word congregation. What is the congregation? Avec un petit c. A congregation is the group of people who worship together in a church. Yeah? So congregation, le prêtre plus ou moins coupable dans l'église, oui, il a les gens devant lui, les fidèles, et les fidèles constituent sa congregation. Okay, so the congregation is a group of people in a religious community. It's an ordinary word, okay, a congregation. So there's an adjective I want to give you now. I want you to add to your list, okay, which I don't know why I didn't put on here. There's an adjective, the adjective corporate. Corporate, yeah? C-O-R-P-O-R-A-T-E. Corporate, the corporate sector, you know, like corporations, yeah? Like Crédit Agricole, JP Morgan, private banks, Apple, Amazon, these are called corporations, right? Big society. So the word corporate is often used in relation to that. I don't mean it like that. Corporate essentially means of a group. It's a group identity, the adjective corporate. So the third kind of colony is called a corporate colony. Okay? A corporate colony belongs to the inhabitants of the colony. The owners of the colony are the people who live there. Right? That's a corporate colony. Because when I say the people who live there, I mean the white men with money. Because women, no. Women have no rights. Women can't own anything. And without obviously talking about indigenous people or anything. La femme en France a eu le droit de vote en quelle année? Les femmes françaises? 45. C'est dingue. La femme était un bien qui a And they all had very different cultures. And they had very little contact. There was no contact between Massachusetts and Virginia. There was zero contact between Virginia and Georgia. Nobody in New York went to Virginia, wanted to go to Virginia, knew anything about Virginia. Okay? So if you wanted to go from Georgia to Massachusetts, it was much quicker. You go from Georgia to London, and then London to Massachusetts, because there were no roads joining the colonies, right? Yeah? There was no kind of ligne de bateau, rien, okay? Because they're just trading, right? They're just living their thing, right? So that independence of the colonies is very important, right? They had different cultures. Some of them were Catholic. I mean, it's Catholic. The king in Britain was Protestant, but in some of the southern colonies, you had a Catholic dispensation ideology. Yeah. Some of them were more monarchist, some of them were anti-monarchist, right? Yeah. So I want to just go to the Constitution and look at, if I've got time, the question, should I do that or should I do that? Okay, I'll do that. So on page 11 in the Constitution, okay, there's still a slave economy. Right? So during the beginnings of the Constitution, the Constitutional Congress, qui est le numéro 61 dans le lexique, Constitutional Congress in 1787 in Philadelphia, there was an argument between the states about representation. Yeah, I mentioned this last week. You can't remember. The smaller states wanted each state to have equal representation, right? And the states with a bigger population wanted more representation, were bigger, right? It's a bit like in the Union Européenne, yeah? L'Allemagne, la France, l'Italie, more power than Lituanie, Lettonie, and Estonie, right? Because they're small, these guys are big. So they achieved a compromise, yeah. And I think in the lexicon, if you look at number 62, the 62 in your lexicon, yeah, 62, vous les avez numérotés les termes, hein? Oui, 62, New Jersey plan, Virginia plan. I talked about that, no? Yeah, where New Jersey is a small state, Virginia is a big state. Okay, so the New Jersey plan said equal representation for each state. Virginia said, well, representation should be proportional to our population. Okay? So what they did eventually was, let's say, okay, the Senate is equal. Chaque État a 2 sénateurs, that's the upper house, and then the House of Representatives is proportional to population. Okay? Yeah. So Virginia, it's called the Virginia Plan, right? Virginia, en 1700, en Virginie, il y avait 20% de la population était esclave. Ok, Virginia. En 1770, donc juste avant la Constitution, 50% de la population était esclave. Huge slave population in Virginia. Huge. Yeah, and in other states, south too, you had that kind of figure. So Virginia said, okay, with all this population, we want a lot of representatives, okay? So what they did was they developed, so white people, okay, what do you do with black people, with Africans? Because they have zero rights, yeah? The Africans have zero rights, zero representation. But Virginia said, yeah, but there's hundreds of thousands of these people in Virginia, right? So, can we look on page 11, yeah? Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states. Donc, on va attribuer les representatives parmi les États selon le principe suivant. Okay, c'est ça. Which may be included with this union according to their respective numbers. Donc la population, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, free white people, including those bound to service for a term of years. Those are the indentured servants I talked to you about, yeah? Les gens qui ont eu le passage transatlantique gratuit en échange de travail pendant 7, 9 ou 11 ans pour un propriétaire pour rien. Ça, c'est les esclaves blancs. Okay, you have white slaves, right? So those are the people bound to service for a term of years. So you got the free people, the indentured servants, and what about and excluding Indians not taxed, so the Indians don't exist, right? 3/5 of all other persons, ça veut dire les 60% des Africains, des esclaves. So a slave equals 60% of a person. So that what happened is that so the slave states with big slave populations had more political power, yeah, because they had more representatives, right? Yeah? The bigger your population, the more députés you have, the more representatives you have. But of course, you have that number of representatives because of all those black people in your state, all those slaves, but they have no civil rights, right? Yeah? So the slave states got a disproportionate representation in the Congress, okay? That's the first thing. That's the first thing. And then if you go to page 13 in the document, yeah, tout à fait en bas à gauche, section 8, number 3, section 8, clause 3. These are the powers of the federal Congress, right? Et c'est qui a dicté ces trucs-là? C'est les États qui ont dicté, qui ont voulu dicter, limiter le pouvoir du gouvernement fédéral. So, Congress shall have power, je lis numéro 3, to regulate commerce. To regulate commerce. Donc, il y a réguler le commerce. Enfin, très bien, ok. Mais où? Yeah? With foreign nations and among the several states. So the federal government, this is very important, ça va paraître une phrase très banale, non? But look at it. The federal government has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and regulate commerce between the states. Donc, what's called interstate commerce. Oui? Inter, I-N-T-E-R, interstate, c'est entre les États. But does not have any power to regulate commerce inside the state. Ce qu'on appelle intra, I-N-T-R-A, intra, à l'intérieur des États. The federal government has no power to regulate commerce in a state. So the government doesn't touch my property. It doesn't touch my trade, my slave trade, my production. Okay, that's one thing. Yeah? No federal control. Turnover. Section 9. Donc on est à la page 14. Okay? Section 9. Clause 1. Yeah? Donc on est tout à fait en haut ici, là. La page 14, en haut à gauche. Yeah? Alright? You're there. No, the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit, shall not be prohibited, interdit, by the Congress prior to, avant, the year 1808. Ça veut dire jusqu'en 1808, on peut continuer à importer des esclaves. Okay? Another 20 years, in other words. Because of course South Carolina said, if you don't let us continue importing slaves, there's no union. No slavery, no union. No ratification of the Constitution. Okay? So slaves are imported till 1808. Et on a vu le premier cours, on a vu que l'esclavage n'a pas été aboli aux États-Unis. Oui? Là, le 13e amendement permet l'esclavage comme punition. Yeah? In the penitentiary system, right? And then to look, I want to go to number 5 on that page, donc juste quelques lignes plus bas. No tax, impôt, or duty, tarif, yeah, douanière, yeah. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. Articles exported from any state. Slaves. So the government cannot regulate commerce in the state, and the government cannot financially tax the transfer of slaves between states. Yeah? The government has very little power over private property. Yeah? Private property is sacred in the Constitution. Section 10, clause 2, donc juste en dessous de là, il parle de l'argent et de l'or. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imports or exports, except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws. So, state, non seulement le gouvernement fédéral ne peut pas mettre des impôts sur les exports des États, mais les États non plus ne peuvent pas le faire. Yeah? State governments cannot tax the movement of goods and capital. The movement of goods and the movement of capital are protected in the Constitution. Okay, it's really important. Now. And then the last thing I want to look at, vous tournez la page 16. Article 4, section 2, donc on est à la page 16. Là, on est ici, là, Article 4, section 2, clause 3. No person held to service or labor in one state, autrement dit un esclave, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. So a slave who escapes from the south to the north to a state where there's no slavery, in this state there are laws making slavery illegal. It doesn't matter. If the slave goes from here to here, and the owner here wants the slave back, he has to come back. Even though slavery is illegal here. Yeah? Okay? There are other things in the Constitution too. The slave economy determines the free movement of capital, protection of private property, the impossibility of taxing private wealth. Okay? Et je vous ai montré déjà le 16e amendement où en 1900, c'est page 19, là, article 16, c'est là où il découvre la possibilité de mettre un impôt sur le revenu. Un impôt national, c'est 1913. Il fallait attendre 1913 avant d'avoir un impôt sur le revenu. Et si vous regardez les dates, the dates, it was passed in 1909, Article 16. It took 4 years to ratify. 4 years to ratify the article establishing income tax. Yeah? You don't tax private money. You don't tax private property. You don't stop the movement of capital. Okay? So of course Amazon and Apple, those guys who pay no tax, they're following the Constitution, the principles of the Constitution. Okay? Yeah? Alright, we'll stop there today. So next week we're going to visit England in the 17th century. Okay? Alright?